The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, Wyoming territory. It was the autumn of 1888, and the air carried the bite of approaching winter. Emma Loudon stood in the center of the town square, her wrists bound with rough rope, her green eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the weathered buildings. At 21, she should have been planning her future, perhaps teaching children their letters or tending to a home of her own. Instead, she found herself at the mercy of a town that had turned its back on her. The wooden cage stood like a monument to cruelty in the heart of the square, constructed from thick pine logs. It measured no more than 6 feet in any direction, barely enough room for a person to stand upright or lie down comfortably. Above it, nailed to a post, hung a crudely painted sign that made Emma's stomach turn each time she glimpsed it. Barren woman, unfit for society. Silas McGraw supervised the spectacle from the porch of his general store, his thick fingers wrapped around a silver-headed cane he didn't need for walking. At 53, McGraw owned half the buildings in Willow Creek and held mortgages on most of the rest. His pale eyes, set deep in a face marked by greed more than age, watched Emma with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was doing God's work. "Let this be a lesson," McGraw's voice boomed across the square, addressing the small crowd that had gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of fear. "A woman who cannot fulfill her sacred duty has no place among decent folk. The Lord has marked her, and we must heed his judgment." Emma bit her tongue to keep from responding. She had learned in the past weeks that words were useless weapons against McGraw's influence. The truth, that she had never been given the chance to discover whether she could bear children, that her husband had abandoned her after only 3 months of marriage when a prettier prospect came along, mattered nothing to these people. McGraw had paid the town physician, Dr. Horace Finch, to declare her medically unfit for motherhood without so much as an examination. The cage door slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Sheriff Tom Briggs, a thin man who seemed to shrink inside his own badge, fumbled with the padlock. His hands shook as he secured it, and Emma caught the flash of shame in his eyes before he turned away. "Sheriff Briggs," Emma called out, her voice steady despite her circumstances. "You have a daughter. Would you see her treated this way?" The lawman paused but didn't turn back. "You should have accepted Mr. McGraw's proposal. Miss Loudon, he offered you protection." "He offered me servitude," Emma replied. "I'd rather face your cage than share his bed." A murmur ran through the crowd at her boldness. Women weren't supposed to speak so plainly, especially women in her position. McGraw's face darkened, and he struck his cane against the porch boards. "Silence. You see how she corrupts even now? A proper woman would show humility, would understand her place. But this one," he pointed his cane at Emma, "this one dares to refuse the charity of her betters." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their shops and homes with heads bowed. Emma watched them go, memorizing faces, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house where Emma had once rented a room averted her eyes. Samuel Chen, the Chinese launderer who had always been kind to her, was pushed along by others who muttered about knowing his place. Even Reverend Paul Matthews, who had spoken from his pulpit about Christian charity just last Sunday, turned his back and walked toward his church. As the square emptied, Emma was left with the reality of her situation. The cage sat on a raised platform, ensuring that anyone passing through town would see her. The autumn wind cut through her thin dress, the same blue calico she'd worn when they arrested her at dawn. They hadn't allowed her to gather any belongings, not even a shawl. The first hour passed slowly. Emma stood because sitting on the rough wooden floor would ruin what dignity she had left. She watched the life of the town continue around her, merchants opening their shops, children hurrying to the schoolhouse where she had once hoped to teach, women gathering water from the public well while pretending not to see her. By noon, the sun had climbed high enough to beat down directly on the cage. There was no shade, no protection from the elements. Emma's throat grew parched, but no one offered water. McGraw had made it clear that anyone who aided her would face his wrath. And in a town like Willow Creek, that was tantamount to a death sentence for one's business or livelihood. Young Timothy Morrison, barely 16 and working as a clerk in the general store, tried to sneak her a cup of water when McGraw went inside for his lunch. But McGraw's man, Bull Henley, a brute who served as both bodyguard and enforcer, caught the boy's arm and sent the cup flying. The water splashed into the dust just inches from the cage. "Mister," McGraw said, "no charity for the cursed woman." Bull growled, "You want to lose your position." "Boy!" Timothy scurried away, and Emma closed her eyes against the sight of the water soaking into the ground. She had known hardship before. Her parents had died of fever when she was 15, leaving her to make her own way in the world. But this deliberate cruelty, this public humiliation, was something else entirely. As afternoon wore on, people began to treat her presence as a grotesque form of entertainment. Men would walk by and spit tobacco juice near the cage. Women would gather in small groups, whispering and pointing while keeping their children close, as if Emma's supposed affliction might be catching. "I heard her husband said she was cold as mountain stone," one woman said loudly enough for Emma to hear. "No wonder the Lord closed her womb." "McGraw's doing her a kindness, offering marriage." Another replied, "A barren woman should be grateful for any man's attention." Emma wanted to scream the truth, that her husband had been a drunk and a liar who had married her for the small inheritance her parents left, spent it all in 2 months, then run off with a saloon dancer. That McGraw's interest in her had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with her resemblance to his deceased wife. That the doctor who declared her barren had been too drunk to properly examine a horse, let alone a woman. But she held her silence. These people had made up their minds, and McGraw's money ensured they would keep them made up. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Emma finally allowed herself to sit. Her legs shook from standing all day, and her head pounded from lack of water. She drew her knees up to her chest and rested her forehead against them, trying to block out the world beyond the bars. That's when she heard it, the sound of numerous horses approaching from the east. Not the tired plod of farm horses or the measured pace of townsfolk, but the purposeful thunder of riders who had somewhere to be. Emma raised her head, squinting against the dying light. A group of cowboys was riding in, their silhouettes dark against the sunset. Dust rose in clouds from their horses' hooves, and the jingle of spurs and creak of leather filled the air. They were bringing in a herd. She could hear the distant lowing of cattle and see the dust cloud on the horizon that marked their passage. Most of the riders passed through without a second glance at the cage. Just another oddity in another frontier town. But the last rider, bringing up the rear of the group, slowed his mount to a walk as he entered the square. Emma had never seen a man so large. Even atop his horse, a massive black stallion that seemed small beneath him, his size was evident. Broad shoulders strained against a leather vest, and his hands on the reins were like ham hocks. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see a dark beard shot through with premature silver. The giant rider guided his horse closer to the cage, and Emma found herself pressing back against the bars. She had learned to fear the attention of men, especially in her current state. But the rider didn't leer or spit or make crude comments. Instead, he read the sign above her cage, and his entire body went rigid. "What in the name of all that's holy is this?" His voice was deep as a mountain cavern, carrying across the square with the force of rolling thunder. McGraw, who had returned to his porch to watch the cowboys pass, stood up straighter. Even from her cage, Emma could see him calculating. This stranger was clearly successful. Judging by his equipment and the quality of his mount, a potential customer, perhaps. "Nothing that need concern you, stranger," McGraw called out. "Just local justice being served. You here to sell those beeves?" The giant rider ignored the question. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and Emma gasped. Standing, he was even more imposing, at least 6.5 feet tall, built like one of the pine trees that covered the surrounding mountains. He approached the cage with measured steps, spurs ringing against the packed earth. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair and eyes the color of winter sky. How long have you been in there? Emma found her voice. Since dawn, sir. Without water? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. The man's jaw tightened, and he turned to face McGraw. You'd cage a woman like an animal? Deny her water? What kind of town is this? McGraw descended from his porch, Bull Henley flanking him. The kind that maintains proper moral standards. Mr. Rollins, Jackson Rollins, and I've been in plenty of towns from here to Texas. Mr. McGraw, never seen one that confused cruelty with morality. You don't understand the situation, McGraw said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining simple facts to a child. This woman is barren. She cannot fulfill a woman's purpose. She refused the protection of marriage when it was offered. The cage is a mercy. It shows others what happens when you reject God's plan. Jackson Rollins stood very still for a long moment. Then he walked back to his horse and retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag. He returned to the cage and held it through the bars to Emma. Drink, he said simply. Emma hesitated, glancing at McGraw and Bull Henley. But the look in the giant cowboy's eyes brooked no argument. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the cool water like salvation on her parched throat. I warned against aiding her, McGraw said, his voice sharp now. You're new here, so I'll give you one chance to walk away. Jackson Rollins turned slowly to face McGraw. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the promise of violence barely held in check. I've been riding for 3 days. Mr. McGraw, I'm tired. I'm dusty. And I just watched you torture an innocent woman for your own twisted satisfaction. So I'll give you one chance to unlock that cage and let her go. The square, which had been emptying as folks headed home for supper, suddenly filled again as word spread of the confrontation. Emma saw faces appear in windows and doorways, the townspeople too cowardly to act but eager to witness whatever came next. McGraw laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Bull, perhaps you should explain to Mr. Rollins how things work in Willow Creek. Bull Henley stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He was a large man himself, used to intimidating others with his size, but next to Jackson Rollins, he looked almost ordinary. You should mount up and ride on, cowboy, Bull said. This ain't your concern. Jackson handed his hat to Emma through the bars. Hold this for me. Ma'am, I'd hate for it to get dirty. Then, in a movement so fast Emma barely saw it, he grabbed Bull Henley by the throat and lifted him clean off the ground. Bull's feet kicked uselessly in the air as his face turned red, then purple. I disagree, Jackson said conversationally, as if he weren't currently strangling a man one-handed. I think this is very much my concern. He tossed Bull aside like a rag doll. The enforcer hit the ground hard and lay there gasping for air. Jackson turned his attention back to the cage, examining the lock. Sheriff, McGraw shouted, do your duty. Sheriff Briggs had appeared at the edge of the square, but he made no move to intervene. Seems like a personal dispute to me. Mr. McGraw, nothing in the law says I have to get between two men settling their differences. Jackson wrapped his massive hands around 2 of the cage bars. The wood was thick, designed to hold, but it had been hastily constructed. He planted his feet and pulled. The first bar cracked like a gunshot. The second groaned and began to splinter. Emma scrambled back as Jackson wrenched the bars apart, creating an opening large enough for her to pass through. Ma'am, he said, extending his hand. I believe you've been in there long enough. Emma took his hand. It swallowed hers completely, and let him help her through the gap. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, but Jackson steadied her with surprising gentleness. This is a mistake, McGraw hissed. You don't know what you're doing. That woman is cursed, marked by God himself as unnatural. You'll bring damnation on yourself by... Jackson's fist connected with McGraw's jaw, cutting off the tirade. The merchant crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dirt. The square erupted in shocked whispers. No one had ever stood up to Silas McGraw, let alone knocked him senseless in front of half the town. Jackson seemed unconcerned by the attention. He retrieved his hat from Emma and placed it on his head. "Can you ride, ma'am?" Emma nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. It had been years since she'd been on a horse. "Good." He whistled sharply, and his black stallion trotted over. "We're leaving." "Unless anyone else wants to discuss the morality of caging women." No one spoke. Even Bull Henley, who had managed to sit up, made no move to stop them. Jackson lifted Emma onto his horse as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, and Emma was surrounded by the scent of leather and trail dust and something wild that reminded her of pine forests. "Where are we going?" she asked as he turned the horse toward the edge of town. "Away from here." Jackson Rollins replied, "Anywhere has to be better than a town that puts women in cages." As they rode out of Willow Creek, Emma glanced back once at the broken cage standing empty in the square. McGraw was stirring, Bull Henley helping him to his feet. She knew they would come after them. McGraw's pride would demand it, but for now, she was free. And for the first time in months, Emma Loudon allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had a future after all. The black stallion carried them through the darkening landscape as stars began to pierce the velvet sky. Emma had never ridden with a stranger before, let alone one who had just destroyed a cage and knocked out the most powerful man in Willow Creek. Yet, despite the impropriety of their position, her back pressed against his chest, his arm secure around her waist, she felt safer than she had in months. Jackson Rollins guided his horse with the confidence of a man who had spent more nights under stars than roof. They followed a trail that wound up into the foothills, leaving the lights of Willow Creek behind like dying embers. The temperature dropped as they climbed, and Emma couldn't suppress a shiver in her thin dress. Without a word, Jackson reined in his horse. He dismounted and pulled a wool blanket from his saddlebag, wrapping it around Emma's shoulders before climbing back up behind her. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the blanket tight. It smelled of campfire smoke and horse, but it was warm and clean. "We'll ride for another hour," he said, his deep voice rumbling through his chest. "Need to put distance between us and town before we stop. Can you manage?" Emma nodded, though exhaustion weighed on her like stones. The day in the cage, the lack of water and food, the emotional toll of public humiliation. It all pressed down on her. But she would not complain. This man had risked his reputation, possibly his life, to free her. The least she could do was endure a hard ride. They climbed higher into the mountains, following paths that seemed invisible to Emma but clear as day to Jackson. The horse picked its way carefully over rocky ground, through stands of aspen that whispered in the night breeze. Occasionally, Jackson would stop and listen, his body tense, before continuing on. "You know these mountains," Emma observed. "Been riding this territory for 15 years. Jackson replied, "Started when I was 20. These hills have been better to me than most towns," after what felt like hours but was probably only one. Jackson guided them off the main trail onto a barely visible path that wound between massive boulders. They emerged into a small valley where a creek gurgled over stones, its sound music in the quiet night. On a rise above the creek sat a cabin, solid and well-built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. "Home," Jackson said simply. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Emma down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, the combination of exhaustion and the day's ordeal finally overwhelming her. Jackson caught her before she could fall, lifting her into his arms as easily as he might carry a child. "I can walk," Emma protested weakly. "No shame in being tired. Ma'am, you've endured more today than most folks face in a lifetime." He carried her to the cabin and shouldered open the door. The interior was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, shelves lined with books that surprised her. A ladder led to what must be a loft, and a door suggested another room beyond. Everything was sized for a large man, from the high rafters to the oversized furniture. Jackson set her gently in a chair by the cold fireplace and immediately set about building a fire. His movements were efficient, practiced. Within minutes, warmth began to spread through the room. "I'll see to my horse, then fix you something to eat," he said. "There's water in that pitcher if you need it." Emma watched him go, then looked around the cabin more carefully. Despite its remote location and rustic construction, there were touches of unexpected refinement. The books on the shelves included Shakespeare and Dickens, alongside practical guides to cattle ranching. A violin case sat in one corner. Native pottery decorated the mantel, and a beautiful woven blanket, clearly Indian-made, hung on one wall. She poured herself water from the pitcher, drinking slowly this time, savoring each swallow. Her reflection in the window glass showed a woman she barely recognized. Hair disheveled, face drawn with exhaustion, dress dirty and torn. Yet for the first time in months, her eyes held something other than despair. Jackson returned, carrying her few possessions. Apparently, he'd stopped by the boarding house on their way out of town. "Mrs. Henderson packed your things. Seemed eager to help once McGraw was unconscious." Emma almost smiled at that. Fear makes cowards of us all, I suppose. Fear makes survivors of us all, Jackson corrected gently. Can't fault folks for protecting themselves, even if we wish they'd be braver. He moved to a corner of the cabin that served as a kitchen, pulling down dried goods and preserved vegetables. "Hope you don't mind simple fare. Been living bachelor life so long, I've forgotten what proper cooking looks like." "Anything would be welcome," Emma said honestly. Thank you. For everything. You don't even know me. And you—" "Know enough," Jackson interrupted, keeping his back to her as he worked. "Know you were being tortured for the crime of existing. Know you had the courage to refuse McGraw, even when it meant that cage. That tells me plenty." He prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, but to Emma it tasted like a feast. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling and the creek singing outside. When she finished, Jackson cleared the dishes and returned with a bundle of cloth. "My sister left these last time she visited," he said, setting down what proved to be a riding skirt, blouse, and sturdy boots. "Elizabeth's about your size. Figured you might want something warmer than that dress." Emma fingered the quality wool of the skirt. "Your sister visits you here. When she can. Lives in Denver now with her husband. Keeps threatening to civilize me." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "You can change in the bedroom." He gestured to the door she'd noticed earlier. The bedroom was sparse but clean, with a bed large enough for a giant, a washstand, and a trunk. Emma changed quickly, relief flooding through her as she shed the dress that had become a symbol of her humiliation. The clothes fit reasonably well, and the boots were heaven after a day standing barefoot on rough wood. When she emerged, Jackson had laid out blankets by the fire. "You take the bedroom. I'll bed down out here." "I couldn't. This is your home, and you're my guest," he said firmly. "Been sleeping on the ground so long. A floor feels like luxury. Please, ma'am, you need proper rest." Emma wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was winning. "I don't even know how to thank you, Mr. Rollins." "Jackson," he corrected. "And no thanks needed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." She moved toward the bedroom, then paused. "Why did you do it? Really? You could have sold your cattle, avoided all this trouble." Jackson was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried weight beyond its years. "When I was younger, I rode with some men who weren't good men, did things I'm not proud of, looked the other way when I should have acted. One day, we robbed a stage. Wasn't supposed to be anyone hurt, just money taken. But there was a family inside. Mother, father, little girl about 7. He paused, lost in memory. Emma moved back toward the fire, drawn by the pain in his voice. "Things went bad. One of my partners shot the father when he tried to protect his family. The mother threw herself over her daughter, begging, and I just sat on my horse. Didn't pull the trigger myself, but didn't stop it either. They killed them all. Even the little girl." Emma's hand went to her throat. "Oh, Jackson, I left that life that very day. Been trying to make amends ever since, though I know there's no real atonement for standing by while innocents suffer. So when I saw you in that cage, saw those people standing around doing nothing..." He shrugged his massive shoulders. "Couldn't ride by. Not again." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Emma found herself moving closer to this giant of a man who carried such guilt. "You're not that person anymore," she said softly. "Maybe not, but the past has a way of clinging to a man. McGraw will come for you. You know, he's not the type to let humiliation stand. And when folks learn you're here with me, alone..." He looked at her meaningfully. "Your reputation. What's left of it?" "My reputation was destroyed the moment they put me in that cage," Emma said with more strength than she felt. "I'm already fallen in the eyes of society. At least here I'm free." Jackson nodded slowly. "Still, come morning, we should talk about getting you somewhere safe. Maybe Denver. My sister would take you in, help you start fresh." Emma wanted to protest that she had nowhere else she wanted to go, that this cabin already felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived. But that was foolishness, born of exhaustion and gratitude. Instead, she simply said, "We'll see what morning brings." She retired to the bedroom, sinking into the large bed with a sigh. Through the door, she could hear Jackson moving about, banking the fire, checking locks, the sounds of a man securing his home. It should have frightened her, being alone in a remote cabin with a stranger. Instead, she felt protected. As sleep began to claim her, Emma thought about the twists that had brought her here. This morning she'd woken in a cage, condemned by society as worthless. Tonight she lay in a warm bed, saved by a man who saw cages as things to be broken rather than built. Outside, she heard Jackson step onto the porch, probably to smoke or check the weather. His footsteps were surprisingly quiet for such a large man. Everything about him was a contradiction. The gentle giant who could snap a man like a twig, but handled her with infinite care. The rough cowboy who read Shakespeare. The loner who risked everything for a stranger. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and soon rain began pattering on the roof. Emma burrowed deeper into the blankets, feeling truly safe for the first time since her husband had abandoned her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, McGraw's vengeance, decisions about her future, the complicated reality of accepting help from a man who owed her nothing. But tonight, she was free. Tonight, she was warm and fed and treated with dignity. And if she dreamed of strong hands breaking bars and kind eyes the color of winter sky, well, that was between her and the darkness. The rain intensified, turning into a mountain storm that would wash away their tracks and buy them time. In the main room, Jackson settled by the dying fire, his thoughts his own. Two damaged souls had found each other in the vast wilderness of Wyoming territory, one seeking redemption, the other seeking freedom. What would come of it remained to be written in the days ahead. Emma woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The massive bed, the log walls, the scent of pine and wood smoke. Then memory flooded back. The cage, the rescue. Jackson Rollins. Pale morning light filtered through the window, revealing a view that took her breath away. The cabin sat nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, their tops already dusted with early snow. A creek wound through stands of aspen and pine, their leaves just beginning to turn gold. It was wild, isolated, and utterly beautiful. She rose slowly, her body protesting yesterday's ordeal. The riding clothes still felt strange but comfortable. Through the window, she could see Jackson splitting wood, his movements rhythmic and effortless. He'd removed his vest, and his shirt stretched across his broad back with each swing of the axe. Emma made her way to the main room, where she found coffee already brewing on the stove and biscuits warming in a covered pan. The simple domesticity of it made her throat tight. When was the last time anyone had prepared breakfast with her in mind? The door opened and Jackson entered, carrying an armload of split wood. He nodded when he saw her. "Morning. Hope you slept well. Better than I have in months." Emma admitted. The coffee smells wonderful. It's strong enough to float a horseshoe, he warned, stacking the wood by the fireplace. But it'll put life back in you. They ate breakfast in companionable quiet, the morning sun gradually warming the cabin. Emma noticed Jackson favoring his left shoulder slightly. "You're hurt," she said. He shrugged, then winced. "Bull Henley got in a lucky blow before I put him down. It's nothing." "May I see?" Jackson hesitated, then nodded. When he removed his shirt, Emma gasped. A dark bruise spread across his shoulder and down his ribs. But it wasn't the fresh injury that shocked her. It was the network of scars covering his back and chest. Some were clearly bullet wounds. Others looked like knife marks. His body was a map of violence survived. "The life I mentioned last night," he said quietly, correctly interpreting her reaction. "It leaves marks." Emma fetched water and clean cloth, gently cleaning the bruised area. Her hands seemed impossibly small against his massive frame. "These scars, how are you still alive?" "Too stubborn to die, my sister says." He sat still under her ministrations, though she sensed he wasn't used to being tended. "That feels better, thank you." As he pulled his shirt back on, Emma noticed how carefully he moved, how he positioned himself to always see the door and windows. Even here in his own home, he remained vigilant. "I should teach you to shoot," he said suddenly. Emma blinked. "I beg your pardon." "McGraw will come. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. You should know how to defend yourself." He studied her with those winter sky eyes. "Unless you've decided to go to Denver," the question hung between them. Emma knew the sensible answer. Of course she should go to Denver. Start fresh where no one knew her shame, but looking around the cabin, feeling the peace of the mountains, she found herself reluctant to leave. "Not yet," she said finally. "If you don't mind the company a bit longer." Something flickered across Jackson's features. "Relief? Stay as long as you need." They spent the morning doing chores that felt almost domestic. Jackson showed her around the property, the smokehouse where he cured meat, the root cellar built into the hillside, the small corral where a few horses grazed alongside his black stallion. Everything was well maintained, built to last through harsh mountain winters. "You've made a good life here," Emma observed as they fed the horses. "It's quiet," Jackson agreed. "Peaceful. A man can think clearly without town noise and nonsense." "Don't you get lonely?" He considered this. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than the wrong company, and the mountains don't judge a man for his past." After lunch, true to his word, Jackson began teaching her to shoot. He started with an old Colt .45, patiently explaining its workings. "Don't jerk the trigger, squeeze it gentle, like you're pressing a baby's hand. Let the shot surprise you." Emma's first attempts were disasters, bullets flying wild, but Jackson remained patient, adjusting her stance, correcting her grip. By late afternoon, she was hitting the target, an old tin can, more often than not. "You're a natural," Jackson said with approval. "Steady hands, steady nerve." "I had a good teacher." Emma lowered the gun, studying him. "Why are you helping me, really? It can't just be about making amends for the past." Jackson took the gun, checking it automatically before holstering it. "Maybe at first, but now." He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "You didn't break in that cage. Saw plenty of men who would have. But you stood tall, that kind of strength. It's rare." Heat rose in Emma's cheeks. "I wasn't strong. I was terrified every moment. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about standing tall despite it." He handed her the gun belt. "This is yours now. Practice every day." As the sun began to sink behind the peaks, they returned to the cabin. Jackson started preparing dinner while Emma explored his bookshelf. Along with the classics she'd noticed before, there were journals filled with his neat handwriting, observations about weather, wildlife, philosophical musings. "You write," she said, surprised. Jackson glanced over from the stove. "Help sort thoughts. A man can go strange talking only to horses." Emma opened one journal randomly and read aloud. "The mountains teach patience. They were here before us. Will remain after. Our troubles are snowflakes against their permanence. Beautiful, perhaps, but fleeting." "That's private," Jackson said, "but without heat. It's beautiful. You have a poet's soul." He snorted. "Tell that to the men I've faced down. Step aside. I have a poet's soul." Emma laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in months. It felt foreign but good. "Perhaps that's what makes you dangerous. A man who can appreciate beauty has something worth fighting for." They ate venison stew as darkness fell. The cabin warm and lamp-lit. Outside, wind sang through the pines. And somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. The sound made Emma shiver. "They won't come near," Jackson assured her. "Wolves are smarter than men. They avoid what they don't need to fight." "Unlike McGraw," Emma said quietly. Jackson's expression hardened. "He'll come, probably with a posse. Claim I kidnapped you. Sheriff Briggs won't help him. But McGraw has money to hire guns." "Then I should leave. I won't have you killed for—" "I've faced worse than Silas McGraw," Jackson interrupted. "And I won't have you driven from a safe place by fear of what might come." Emma studied him across the table. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I broke that cage." He met her gaze steadily. "Some things a man can't walk away from twice." After dinner, they sat by the fire. Jackson showed her how to clean and maintain the Colt, his large hands surprisingly delicate with the mechanism. Emma found herself watching not the gun, but his face, the concentration, the competence, the gentle patience so at odds with his fearsome size. "Tell me about before," he said suddenly. "Before McGraw. Before the cage. Who was Emma Loudon?" Emma stared into the fire. "A foolish girl who thought love could overcome anything. My parents died when I was 15. I worked as a seamstress, saved money, dreamed of opening a school. Then Thomas came along, handsome, charming, full of promises. I thought I was the luckiest girl in Wyoming when he proposed." She paused, lost in memory. 3 months. That's all it took for him to show his true nature. Drinking, gambling, other women. When the money ran out, so did he. Left me with nothing but bills and a ruined reputation. And McGraw saw an opportunity. His wife had died the year before. Consumption. I looked enough like her to catch his eye. When I refused his suit, he decided to force the issue. The rest you know. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "You're not foolish. You're human. We all make mistakes trusting the wrong people. Even you. Especially me." He rose, adding another log to the fire. "The men I rode with, I thought they were family. Thought loyalty meant following without question. Took 7 deaths before I understood the difference between loyalty and blind stupidity." Emma wanted to offer comfort, but sensed he wouldn't welcome it. Instead, she said, "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The fallen woman and the reformed outlaw." "Nothing fallen about you," Jackson said firmly. "And reformed is generous. Changed. Maybe trying to be better." A comfortable silence settled between them. The fire crackled, the wind sang, and for a moment, the outside world felt very far away. Emma found herself memorizing the scene. The warm cabin. The giant man reading by firelight. The sense of safety she'd thought lost forever. "I should retire," she said eventually, though she was reluctant to end the evening. Jackson nodded. "I'll be out here if you need anything. And Emma?" She paused at the bedroom door. "You're not alone anymore. Remember that." The words followed her into the bedroom, warming her more than any fire. As she prepared for bed, Emma realized the tight knot of fear she'd carried for months was finally beginning to loosen. Jackson Rollins might be scarred and dangerous, might have a past darker than mountain shadows, but he was also kind, patient, and protective. Through the door, she could hear him moving about, checking locks, damping the fire, the nightly rituals of a careful man. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. McGraw would come. As Jackson predicted, decisions would need to be made about the future. But tonight, she was safe in a mountain cabin with a man who broke cages instead of building them. And for now, That was enough. The wolves howled again, closer this time. But Emma felt no fear. Jackson was right. Wolves were smarter than men. They recognized strength when they saw it. And despite everything that had broken her down, Emma Loudon was beginning to remember her own strength, reflected in the eyes of a gentle giant who saw her not as damaged goods, but as someone worth saving. The storm came on their fourth night in the cabin, bringing with it memories that rattled the windows harder than any wind. Emma woke to the sound of Jackson's voice, low and anguished, coming from the main room. She crept to the door and peered out. He was sitting by the dying fire, head in his hands, speaking to ghosts only he could see. "I'm sorry, Sarah. God, I'm so sorry. Should have stopped them. Should have—" Emma's heart clenched. Sarah. That must have been the little girl from the stagecoach robbery he'd mentioned. She wanted to go to him, but sensed this was a private battle. Instead, she retreated to her bed, listening as his voice eventually faded into silence. The next morning, Jackson seemed subdued, shadows under his eyes telling of a sleepless night. Emma didn't mention what she'd heard, but she made the coffee extra strong and found excuses to brush his shoulder as she moved about the cabin. Small touches to remind him he wasn't alone. "Tell me about your childhood," she said over breakfast, hoping to draw him into lighter memories. Jackson's face softened slightly. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Ma, Pa, 3 sisters, and me. I was the baby, if you can believe it." Emma smiled at the image of Jackson as a small child. "What happened to them?" "Cholera took Ma when I was 12. Pa tried to hold things together, but the grief ate him hollow. Started drinking. Lost the farm. My sisters married young to escape. Can't say I blame them. And you? Ran off at 15. Figured I'd find adventure. Make my fortune." His laugh was bitter. "Found adventure all right, just not the kind the dime novels write about." Emma reached across the table, covering his large hand with her smaller one. "You were a child. You couldn't have known." "Maybe not, but I learned quick enough. Problem was, by then I was in too deep. The gang became my family, twisted as it was. Took me 10 years to understand that family doesn't demand you sell your soul." They sat in silence for a moment before Emma spoke. "I used to dream about having a real family. After my parents died, I thought marriage would give me that. Children, a home, belonging somewhere. You still can have that." Emma withdrew her hand. "You heard what they called me, barren, even if it's a lie. Who would want a woman with that reputation? The right man wouldn't care about rumors." Jackson said firmly, "The right man would see you for who you are." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them. Possibility, hope, fear. Emma looked away first, rising to clear the dishes. "I should check the horses," Jackson said abruptly. Grabbing his coat, Emma watched him go, her heart racing. Was he implying what she thought? Could a man like Jackson, despite his own troubled past, truly see beyond her supposed defect? She busied herself with chores, trying not to think about the warmth in his eyes or the way her pulse quickened when he was near. She was grateful. That was all. Grateful and perhaps a bit lonely. It meant nothing more. But when Jackson returned, bringing with him a handful of late wildflowers to brighten the place, Emma felt walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. That afternoon, as she practiced with the Colt, Jackson told her more about his past, the names of the men he'd ridden with, Frank Colson, Deadeye Pete, the Vasquez brothers, the towns they'd terrorized, the moment he'd finally broken free. "It was right after the stagecoach," he said, watching her aim. "I rode hard for 3 days. Them chasing me. They couldn't understand why I'd turn on them over some strangers. Finally lost them in a blizzard up near Devil's Pass." Emma squeezed the trigger, hitting the can dead center. "What did you do then?" "Drifted for a while. Worked cattle drives. Hired out as protection for wagon trains. Honest work. But the past followed me. Men recognized my face from wanted posters. Even though I'd never been convicted of anything. Hard to build a new life when everyone knows your old one." "Is that why you stay up here alone?" "Partly. Also because I like the quiet. Gives a man space to think, to figure out who he really is when nobody's watching. Emma lowered the gun. And who are you? Jackson Rollins. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still figuring that out, but I know who I want to be. A man who protects instead of destroys. A man who builds instead of tears down. A man worthy of... He stopped, jaw clenching. Worthy of what? Nothing. You're dropping your elbow again. Here, let me show you. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance. Emma was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the gentle strength in his hands as he positioned her arms. When she fired again, the shot went wide. You're distracted, Jackson said, but his voice was rough. Yes, Emma admitted. I am. They stood frozen for a moment, the admission hanging between them. Then Jackson stepped back, clearing his throat. Sun's getting low. We should head in. That evening, Emma found herself restless. She discovered some mending in a basket and busied herself with it while Jackson read. The domestic scene felt both foreign and perfectly natural. My wife used to do that, Jackson said suddenly. Emma's needle stopped. You were married? Long time ago, before the gang, before everything went wrong. He stared into the fire. Mary was her name, sweet girl from a neighboring farm. We married young, had plans, then she died in childbirth, along with the baby, a son. Oh, Jackson. Emma set aside the mending. I'm so sorry. It's what started me down the wrong path. Grief made me reckless, angry at God, at the world. When Frank Coulson offered me a way to strike back, I took it. He rubbed his face. Spent years punishing the world for taking them. Wasn't until that stagecoach that I realized I'd become the kind of man who created widows and orphans instead of protecting them. Emma moved to sit beside him on the floor by the fire. You can't blame yourself forever. You've changed, chosen a different path. Have I? I'm still hiding in these mountains, still alone, still carrying all that blood on my hands. You're not alone now, Emma said softly. Jackson looked at her, firelight dancing in his eyes. No, I'm not. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Emma found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than gratitude. Jackson's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. Emma, he whispered. A shot rang out, shattering the window. Jackson moved instantly, pulling Emma down and shielding her with his body. More shots followed, splintering wood and breaking glass. McGraw, Jackson growled. Stay down. He crawled to where his rifle leaned against the wall, while Emma pressed herself against the floor. Her heart hammered as Jackson peered through a crack in the wall. 6, maybe 7 men, he reported. They've got us surrounded. Jackson Rollins, McGraw's voice carried across the darkness. Send out the woman and we'll let you live. This doesn't concern you anymore. Like hell, Jackson muttered. He called back, the lady stays where she chooses, McGraw. And right now, she chooses here. She's addled, bewitched by you. I'm trying to save her immortal soul. Emma found her voice. My soul is my own business, Mr. McGraw, as is my life. More shots peppered the cabin. Jackson returned fire, his rifle barking in the enclosed space. Emma belly crawled to where the Colt hung on its peg, strapping it on with shaking hands. Good girl, Jackson said approvingly. If they get past me, they won't, Emma said fiercely. We defend this together, despite the danger. Jackson smiled. Together then. The siege continued as full darkness fell. McGraw's men tried various approaches, but Jackson's strategic positioning and marksmanship kept them at bay. Emma reloaded for him, watching the approaches he couldn't cover. During a lull, McGraw tried again. She's barren. Rollins, useless as a woman. Why throw your life away for damaged goods? Jackson's response was a shot that took off McGraw's hat, visible in the moonlight. The only damage I see is in your soul. McGraw, now get off my land before I forget my Christian charity. Emma's heart swelled even as bullets flew. Jackson hadn't hesitated, hadn't questioned. He saw her as whole, worthy of defending. The attack intensified, and Emma spotted movement by the woodshed. Without thinking, she aimed the Colt and fired. A man cried out and fell. "That's my girl," Jackson said proudly. "You're a natural fighter." "I have a good teacher," Emma replied, surprising herself with her steady voice. The battle raged on, but McGraw's men were losing heart. They'd expected easy prey, not a fortified position defended by a skilled gunman and a woman who wouldn't yield. As dawn approached, Emma heard horses retreating. "Rollins!" McGraw's voice was hoarse with rage. "This isn't over. I'll be back with more men, with the law. You'll hang for kidnapping, and she'll burn as a witch." "Looking forward to it," Jackson called back cheerfully. "Bring coffee when you come. We're running low." They waited until the sun was fully up before venturing out. The ground was littered with brass casings and blood trails showing where wounded men had been dragged away. "They'll be back," Jackson said grimly. "McGraw's pride won't let this stand. Then we'll be ready," Emma said. She looked at the bullet-riddled cabin, then at Jackson. "I'm not running anymore. This is my stand, here with you." Jackson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we'd better prepare for war." As they began assessing the damage and planning defenses, Emma realized something had shifted between them. The interrupted moment by the fire hung in the air, a promise of conversations yet to come. But for now, they had a more immediate concern: survival. And if the way Jackson kept glancing at her was any indication, he was fighting for more than just principle now. He was fighting for a future, their future. The thought should have terrified Emma. Instead, it filled her with a fierce determination. McGraw thought her worthless, damaged, barren. But here in these mountains, fighting beside a man who saw her truly, Emma Loudon was discovering her worth had nothing to do with what her body could or couldn't do. It had to do with the strength of her spirit, the fire in her heart, and the love beginning to bloom in the most unlikely of places. The days following McGraw's attack settled into a strange rhythm of watchfulness and unexpected peace. Jackson repaired the damaged windows while Emma kept watch, the Colt now a familiar weight on her hip. They worked in companionable silence, each aware of the other's presence in a way that went beyond mere partnership. On the third morning, as Emma collected eggs from the small coop Jackson maintained, she found him in the workshop crafting something from a piece of pine. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy, coaxing shapes from the wood. "What are you making?" she asked, setting the basket on his workbench. Jackson flushed slightly, an endearing sight on such a formidable man. "Just something to pass the time." He held up the piece, a wooden spoon, still rough but already showing elegant lines. "Figured you might like your own, for when you're cooking." Emma took the half-formed spoon, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful. I didn't know you carved." Man learns all sorts of things living alone in the mountains. Started with whistling, but the horses complained. His attempt at humor couldn't hide the vulnerability in his eyes. "Thought you might like something that was just yours, not borrowed or left behind by someone else." The significance wasn't lost on Emma. In his quiet way, Jackson was saying she belonged here, that this was her home now, too. She clutched the spoon carefully. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." Their eyes met and held, the air between them charging with unspoken words. Then Jackson cleared his throat and returned to his carving, while Emma fled to the safety of the kitchen. That afternoon, while Jackson hunted, Emma explored the meadow behind the cabin. She discovered a wealth of late-blooming wildflowers and medicinal herbs. Using her mother's teachings, she began gathering plants: yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, echinacea for winter colds. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something beyond keeping watch and cooking meals. When Jackson returned with a deer slung over his shoulder, he found her hanging bundles of herbs from the porch rafters to dry. "Making the place yours," he observed with approval. Our place, Emma corrected without thinking, then blushed at her presumption. That is, I mean, our place. Jackson agreed softly. I like the sound of that. That evening, as Emma prepared venison stew with wild herbs, Jackson played his violin. She'd discovered he was quite accomplished, coaxing melodies from the instrument that spoke of loneliness and longing. Tonight, though, the music seemed lighter, almost hopeful. My mother taught me, he explained when she complimented his playing. Said every man should have something beautiful in his life, something that couldn't be taken away. After she died, I kept playing to remember her. Play something cheerful, Emma requested. Something for new beginnings. Jackson considered, then launched into a lively reel that had Emma's feet tapping. Before she knew it, she was dancing around the kitchen, laughing as she hadn't in years. Jackson's eyes followed her movements, his playing becoming more spirited. When the song ended, Emma collapsed in a chair, breathless and happy. I haven't danced since I was a girl. You should dance every day, Jackson said, setting aside the violin. Joy looks good on you. The compliment hung between them, weighted with meaning. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks as Jackson's gaze lingered on her face. I should check the stew, she said, needing distance from the intensity in his eyes. But Jackson caught her hand as she passed. Emma, we should talk about what's happening between us. Emma's heart raced, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. What is happening between us? I think you know. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm not good with words, but I'll try. You've brought something back to life in me I thought was dead. When I see you here, making this place a home, when I watch you stand brave against men who would harm you, I think about possibilities I'd given up on. Jackson, let me finish. I know what the world says about you. I know what they'd say about us. A barren woman and a reformed outlaw. We're not what anyone would call a good match. But Emma, I've learned to judge people by their actions, not society's labels. And your actions show me a woman of courage, kindness, and strength. Emma's eyes burned with unshed tears. You don't know that that I can't. I don't care. Jackson's voice was fierce. Children or no children, you're complete as you are. You're enough. Emma, more than enough. The tears spilled over then. No one had ever said such words to her, had ever suggested she had value beyond her potential as a mother. She gripped Jackson's hand like an anchor. I'm frightened, she admitted. Not of McGraw or his men, of hoping for something good and having it torn away again. Jackson stood, drawing her gently to her feet. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I can promise to see you truly, value you wholly, and protect you fiercely, if you'll have me. Emma looked up at this giant of a man who handled her heart as gently as he carved wood. Are you asking me to marry you, Jackson Rollins? I'm asking you to build a life with me, here in these mountains, away from those who would judge and condemn. A life where you're free to be exactly who you are, where your worth isn't measured by what your body can or can't do. He cupped her face in his massive hands. I'm asking you to let me love you, Emma, because I do. I love your strength, your grace, your refusal to be broken. I love how you've made this cabin a home, how you stand steady with a gun in your hand, how you trust me, despite every reason not to trust any man. Emma could barely breathe past the emotion choking her. I love you too. I didn't think I could. Didn't think I had it in me anymore, but you've shown me there's still good in the world, still men worth believing in. Yes, Jackson. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, gentle despite his strength, reverent as if she were something precious. Emma melted into him, feeling safe and cherished and whole for the first time in her memory. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. We should marry proper, make it legal, so McGraw has no claim on you. How? No preacher would marry us, not with McGraw's influence. There's a Shoshone village 2 days' ride north. Their chief, Joseph Standing Bear is a friend. He could perform the ceremony according to their customs. It would be legal and binding. Emma smiled through her tears. A Shoshone wedding for a fallen woman and a reformed outlaw? It's perfect. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future with wonder in their voices. Jackson spoke of expanding the cabin, adding rooms for Emma's herbs and books. Emma described the garden she'd plant come spring, the life they'd build together. As night fell, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. Jackson had his arm around Emma, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "McGraw will come back," she said eventually. "Let him. He'll find us ready and united, together. We're stronger than his hate." "I used to pray for rescue," Emma admitted. "Locked in that cage, I begged God to send someone. I never imagined he'd send me a giant with gentle hands and a poet's soul." Jackson chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "And I never imagined he'd send me a woman brave enough to make me want to be better than I am." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Emma made a wish, not for rescue or escape, but for the courage to accept the happiness being offered. She'd been broken and rebuilt, judged and found wanting by society's standards. But here in Jackson's arms, she was complete. Inside the cabin, the wooden spoon Jackson had carved sat on the mantel, still rough but full of promise. Like their love, it would be shaped and smoothed by time and attention, becoming something both functional and beautiful. Tomorrow would bring challenges. McGraw would return with more men, more threats. Winter was coming to the mountains. The world beyond their valley would continue to judge and condemn. But tonight, Emma Loudon and Jackson Rollins sat together under a canopy of stars, planning a future that defied every expectation society had placed on them. They would marry in the Shoshone way, build their life in the mountains, and prove that worth wasn't measured in conventional terms. Sometimes the greatest rebellions were the quiet ones, two damaged souls choosing to heal together, finding in each other not what the world said they should want, but exactly what they needed. The first sign of trouble came with the morning frost. Jackson had risen early to check his trap lines when he spotted fresh horse tracks circling the property, at least a dozen riders, moving with military precision. He returned to find Emma already dressed and armed, having sensed his unease even from inside the cabin. "They're scouting," he told her grimly. "Testing our defenses, looking for weak points." Emma checked the loads in her Colt. "How long before they attack?" "Tonight, maybe tomorrow. McGraw's bringing an army this time." Jackson moved to the window, studying the terrain with a strategist's eye. "We need to prepare." They spent the morning fortifying their position. Jackson had anticipated this day. Hidden caches of ammunition were retrieved, water barrels filled, firing positions reinforced. Emma helped him string wire between trees at horse height, scatter broken glass along approach routes, position mirrors to blind attackers coming from the east. "You've done this before." Emma observed as Jackson showed her how to rig a simple but effective alarm system using tin cans and twine. "Defended a position or two in my time. Never for stakes this high, though." He paused in his work to look at her. "I won't let them take you. Emma, whatever happens, we face it together." Emma interrupted firmly. "I'm not some helpless maiden in a fairy tale. Jackson, I'm your partner." He smiled then, pride mixing with worry in his expression. "That you are best partner I've ever had." As afternoon shadows lengthened, Jackson made a difficult decision. "There's an old mine shaft about a mile up the mountain. If things go bad..." "No. Emma, listen. No." She faced him squarely. "I know what you're going to say. If we're overwhelmed, I should run for the mine. Hide until it's safe. But safe will never come if McGraw wins. He'll hunt me to the ends of the earth. My only chance, our only chance, is to stand and fight." Jackson pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "Stubborn woman. You wouldn't love me if I weren't." "True enough." He held her tighter. "But I need you to promise something. If I fall..." "You won't. If I fall," he continued firmly. "You take Zeus and ride hard for the Shoshone village. Tell Joseph Standing Bear what happened. He'll protect you." Emma pulled back to look at him. "And if I fall?" Jackson's face went hard as granite. "Then I'll send every last one of them to hell before I join you." They might have said more, but the sound of approaching horses cut through the evening air. Not the scattered scouts of the morning, but a unified force moving with purpose. Emma counted at least 20 riders emerging from the tree line, McGraw at their head. "Quite a welcome party," Jackson muttered, checking his rifle. McGraw had indeed brought an army. Emma recognized Bull Henley, apparently recovered from his previous encounter with Jackson, and Dr. Finch, the physician who'd declared her barren without examination. The rest were hired guns, hard men with dead eyes and well-used weapons. "Rollins," McGraw's voice carried across the clearing. "I've brought legal documentation. You're harboring a woman declared mentally incompetent by a licensed physician. Release her to my custody, and you might live to see another sunset." Jackson's response was to step onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Let's see this documentation." McGraw held up a sheaf of papers. "Doctor, Finch has sworn testimony that the woman is delusional, possibly dangerous. As a concerned citizen and Christian man, I'm obligated to see her properly cared for." "In a cage," Emma called from the doorway. "That's your idea of care?" "Temporary restraint for your own safety," McGraw replied smoothly. "Until we can arrange proper institutional commitment. There's a fine asylum in Denver that specializes in female hysteria." Emma felt Jackson tense beside her. Asylums were death sentences by another name. Drugged, restrained, subjected to treatments that destroyed mind and spirit. "Here's my counteroffer," Jackson said calmly. "You and your men turn around and ride out. Don't come back. Emma stays here as a free woman, and we all go on with our lives." "I'm afraid that's not possible." McGraw's voice hardened. "She bewitched you. Rollins used her feminine wiles to corrupt a decent man. It's my Christian duty to save you both. Nothing decent about kidnapping a woman," Jackson replied. "And the only thing Emma's guilty of is refusing to spread her legs for you." The crude truth hung in the air. Several of McGraw's hired guns shifted uncomfortably. They'd been told they were rescuing a madwoman, not helping a rejected suitor claim his prize. McGraw's face purpled. "You dare! She's barren, worthless. A woman who can't bear children is an abomination." "The only abomination I see is a man who'd cage a woman for saying no." Jackson's voice carried clearly. "Any of you boys want to rethink your employment? No shame in walking away from a bad job." Two of the younger guns exchanged glances and began backing their horses away. McGraw turned on them furiously. "Cowards! I'm paying you good money." "Not enough to help kidnap a woman," one replied before spurring his horse back toward town. But the rest held firm, and Emma counted 18 men still arrayed against them. The odds were impossible, but she felt strangely calm. This was her stand, her choice. Whatever came next, she'd face it as a free woman. "Last chance. Rollins," McGraw called. "Send her out, or we'll burn you out." "Emma," Jackson said quietly. "Your choice. You can still walk away. Take Zeus. Ride for—" She answered by cocking her Colt. "I believe Mr. McGraw has his answer." Jackson smiled grimly. "That's my girl. Get to your position." They'd planned for this. Emma moved to the reinforced window covering the northern approach while Jackson held the porch. She had ammunition, water, and clear fields of fire. Most importantly, she had something to fight for, not just her freedom, but the life she and Jackson were building together. "So be it," McGraw roared. "Take them." The attack began with a volley of gunfire that shattered the evening peace. Emma forced herself to breathe steadily, picking targets carefully as Jackson had taught her. Her first shot took a man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Her second went wide, but her third found its mark. Jackson's rifle boomed methodically, each shot dropping a rider. His tactical positioning was masterful. Attackers had to expose themselves to approach, and he made them pay for every yard. But there were too many. While Jackson held the front, men circled to the sides and rear. Emma found herself racing between windows, trying to cover multiple approaches. A thrown torch landed on the porch, but Jackson kicked it away before it could catch. "They're trying to flank us," Emma called, firing at shapes moving through the gathering darkness. "Let them come," Jackson replied, his voice deadly calm. "Watch for—" His warning was cut off by the sound of shattering wood. Bull Henley had reached the back door and was breaking through. Emma spun, bringing her Colt up, but Henley was fast for a big man. He knocked the gun from her hand and grabbed her throat. "Got her!" he bellowed. "I got the woman!" Emma didn't panic. Jackson had taught her well. She drove her knee into Henley's groin, and when he doubled over, she grabbed the skinning knife from the kitchen table and buried it in his shoulder. Henley screamed and stumbled back, giving her time to retrieve her Colt. "Nobody's got me," she snarled, shooting him in the leg for good measure. But more men were pouring through the breach. Emma fought desperately, but there were too many. She heard Jackson roar her name, heard his rifle fire faster, trying to reach her. Then strong hands seized her arms, and everything became chaos. She struggled wildly as they dragged her toward the door, catching glimpses of Jackson fighting like a man possessed, throwing attackers aside like rag dolls as he tried to reach her. "Jackson! Emma!" Their eyes met across the melee, and she saw his anguish, his fury. Then something struck the back of her head, and darkness claimed her. She woke to the sound of McGraw's voice and the sensation of movement. She was draped across a saddle, hands tied, head pounding. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils. "Burn it all," McGraw was saying. "Leave nothing standing." Emma forced her eyes open and bit back a cry. The cabin was ablaze, flames leaping into the night sky. Of Jackson. There was no sign. "No," she whispered. McGraw heard her. "Ah, you're awake. Good. You should see what your stubbornness has wrought. Your giant is dead. Your refuge destroyed. You have only yourself to blame." Emma's heart shattered, but she wouldn't give McGraw the satisfaction of her tears. "You're wrong," she said, voice stronger than she felt. "Jackson Rollins is harder to kill than that." McGraw laughed. 7 men couldn't bring him down. But fire cleanses all sins. As they rode away from the burning cabin, Emma fixed her eyes on the flames and made a silent vow. If Jackson lived, she'd find her way back to him. If he died defending her, she'd make McGraw pay, either way. This wasn't over. The mountains had taught her patience. Jackson had taught her strength, and she would use both to survive whatever came next. Behind them, the cabin collapsed in a shower of sparks. But Emma didn't look back again. She was already planning, already fighting. The battle was lost, but the war for her freedom had just begun. The ropes bit into Emma's wrists as McGraw's men dragged her into his study. They'd ridden through the night, reaching his sprawling ranch house as dawn broke. McGraw dismissed his men with a wave, keeping only Bull Henley, wounded but still dangerous, as guard. "You've caused me considerable trouble," McGraw said, pouring himself whiskey despite the early hour. 7 men dead, more wounded, all for a barren woman's pride. Emma lifted her chin. "Those men died because they chose to follow a madman." McGraw's hand cracked across her face, snapping her head to the side. "You'll learn respect, or you'll learn what happens to those who defy me." He pulled out the same documents he'd waved at the cabin. "Doctor, Finch will examine you today. By tomorrow, you'll be on your way to the Denver Asylum for the Mentally Infirm." "Based on what grounds?" Emma demanded, tasting blood from her split lip. "Female hysteria, delusions of independence, violent tendencies." McGraw smiled coldly. "After all, you did stab poor Bull here. Clear signs of madness." Emma's mind raced. Once committed to an asylum, she'd never escape. They'd drug her with laudanum, subject her to ice baths and restraints, break her mind as surely as they'd tried to break her spirit. "Jackson will come for me," she said with more confidence than she felt. McGraw laughed. "Your giant burned with his cabin. My men made sure of that." But Emma had caught the flicker of uncertainty in Bull Henley's eyes. They hadn't found Jackson's body. Hope flared in her chest, quickly hidden. "Lock her in the cellar," McGraw ordered. No food until she signs the commitment papers. The cellar was cold and damp. With stone walls and a single barred window near the ceiling, Emma sank onto the moldy straw, finally allowing tears to fall. Was Jackson truly dead? Had their brief happiness ended in flames? No, she refused to believe it. Jackson Rollins was too stubborn, too strong, too clever to die so easily. He was out there somewhere, and she needed to be ready when he came. Emma examined her prison methodically. The door was solid oak with iron reinforcements. No breaking through that. The window was too small and too high, but the walls. Years of moisture had weakened the mortar between stones. She began working at a loose stone with her fingernails, ignoring the pain as they split and bled. Hours passed. Footsteps occasionally crossed overhead, and once she heard McGraw bellowing at his men to find Rollins' body. The fact that they hadn't meant Jackson had escaped the fire. She worked harder at the stone. Near sunset, Dr. Finch arrived. Emma heard his oily voice through the floorboards, discussing commitment procedures with McGraw. The stone she'd been working came loose, revealing a small cavity behind it, not large enough to escape through, but perhaps. The cellar door opened. Dr. Finch descended, medical bag in hand. McGraw and Bull Henley behind him. Miss Loudon, Finch said with false sympathy. I'm here to help you, mister. McGraw is concerned about your mental state. My mental state is fine. Emma replied evenly. It's my circumstances that need improving. Ah, but that's exactly the kind of statement that concerns us. A proper woman would accept her situation, not fight against it. Finch opened his bag, revealing bottles of various colored liquids. I have medicines that will calm your troubled mind. Poison, you mean? Such paranoia, another symptom. Finch prepared a syringe. This will help you see things more clearly. Emma backed against the wall, mind racing. She couldn't fight 3 men, but if they drugged her, she'd be helpless when Jackson came. If Jackson came, then she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap, the distant cry of a mountain cat, but with a rhythm that was almost like a signal. McGraw heard it too. What was that? Just a cat, Bull said uneasily. These mountains are full of them. The cry came again. Closer. 3 short calls. 3 long. 3 short. Emma almost laughed. Morse code. Oh, Jackson was alive and calling to her. I'll take your medicine, she said suddenly, stepping forward. You're right. I've been foolish. The men relaxed slightly at her apparent surrender. As Finch approached with the syringe, Emma struck. She grabbed the loose stone she'd worked free and smashed it into Finch's temple. The doctor crumpled in the same motion. She rolled past Bull Henley's grasping hands and drove her shoulder into McGraw's stomach. Jackson, she screamed. Jackson, I'm here. All hell broke loose. The kitchen door above exploded inward with a crash that shook the house. Jackson's roar of fury echoed through the building, followed by the sounds of combat. McGraw's men, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Bull Henley grabbed for Emma, but she danced away, using the confined space to her advantage. McGraw pulled a derringer from his vest, aiming at her with shaking hands. You've destroyed everything, he snarled. My reputation, my plans. The cellar door flew off its hinges. Jackson stood at the top of the stairs, clothes singed, face blackened with soot, looking like an avenging angel from the deepest hell. His eyes found Emma, alive and fighting, and his expression became truly terrifying. He descended the stairs in 2 bounds. McGraw fired his derringer, but Jackson didn't even flinch as the bullet grazed his ribs. One massive hand closed around McGraw's throat, lifting him off the ground. You touched her, Jackson growled. You caged her. You tried to break her. Jackson, no, Emma called. Not from mercy, but from wisdom. Don't give them a reason to hang you. I'm all right. Jackson's grip tightened for a moment. Then he dropped McGraw like the garbage he was. The man collapsed, gasping. Bull Henley made one last attempt, pulling a knife. Jackson caught his wrist and squeezed until bones cracked. The knife clattered to the floor. Emma, Can you ride? Jackson asked, never taking his eyes off the men. Yes, then let's go home. The cabin burned, just wood and stone. We'll build another. He pulled her against his side. As long as you're safe, we have everything we need. They backed up the stairs together. The kitchen was a disaster zone. 3 of McGraw's men lay unconscious, and furniture was destroyed. Zeus waited outside, along with a mare Emma didn't recognize. Borrowed her from McGraw's stable, Jackson explained, lifting Emma into the saddle. Figured he owed us. As they mounted, McGraw appeared in the doorway, supported by Bull Henley. This isn't over, he screamed. I'll see you both hang. Jackson turned Zeus to face him. Come after us again, and I'll forget my Christian charity. The mountain takes care of its own justice. Lots of cliffs, lots of places for a man to disappear. The threat hung in the air. McGraw, for all his bluster, was a coward at heart. He shrank back. Jackson and Emma rode hard for an hour before slowing. Only then did Emma see the full extent of Jackson's injuries. Burns on his arms, the bullet graze, countless cuts and bruises. You're hurt, she said. I've had worse. He reached over to touch her face, as if assuring himself she was real. When I saw the cabin burning and couldn't find you, I thought I'd lost you. How did you escape? Old mine shaft I dug beneath the cabin. Planned it years ago. Never thought I'd need it. His jaw tightened. Came up behind the barn just as they were riding off with you. Followed on foot until I could steal a horse from their rear guard. And the signal? The mountain cat. He actually smiled. Remembered you saying your father taught you Morse code. Figured it was worth a try. Emma laughed, then sobbed, then laughed again, overwhelmed by relief and love and the simple joy of being alive and free. They rode through the night again, but this time together. Jackson led them to a hidden valley he'd scouted years before, more remote than their previous home, but just as beautiful. A cave provided temporary shelter. As Jackson built a fire, Emma tended his wounds with herbs she'd grabbed from McGraw's kitchen garden. They worked in comfortable silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. McGraw was right about one thing, Emma said eventually. This isn't over. He'll use his influence, spread lies. We'll be hunted, then we'll disappear. Jackson said simply, change our names. Head north to Canada maybe, or west to California. Lots of places for 2 people to start fresh. What about your sister? Elizabeth will understand. I'll write when it's safe. He pulled Emma close. I'm sorry. Emma, sorry I brought this trouble on you. You brought me freedom, she corrected fiercely. You brought me love. You brought me a life worth living. I'd face McGraw and his entire army again for what we have. Jackson kissed her then, pouring all his relief and love and promise into the gesture. When they parted, he pulled something from his pocket, the wooden spoon he'd been carving, somehow saved from the fire. It's finished, he said, offering it to her. Figured you'd want something of our old home. Emma took the spoon with trembling hands. Despite everything, the fire, the fight, the flight, he'd completed it. The wood was smooth now, polished to a warm shine, beautiful in its simplicity. Our first home, she corrected softly. Not our last. As dawn broke over the mountains, they huddled together in the cave, planning their next move. They'd lost their cabin but kept their freedom, lost their possessions but kept each other. And sometimes, Emma thought, that was the greatest victory of all. McGraw and his hatred seemed very far away, here in the wilderness, with Jackson's arms around her and the mountains standing guard. Emma Loudon felt what had once seemed impossible. Safe, loved, and absolutely, completely free. Spring came to the mountains like a promise kept. 6 months had passed since the fire, since the flight from McGraw's ranch, since Emma and Jackson had begun their new life in the high valley. Their second cabin stood proud against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks, larger than the first, with a real glass windows and a stone chimney that drew properly. Emma stood in what would be her herb garden, turning soil that had been frozen just weeks before. She wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Jackson had brought from the trading post, her hair braided practically, the coat still comfortable on her hip. The woman in McGraw's cage seemed like a stranger from another lifetime. "Mrs. Rawlins." She turned at the call, smiling as Joseph Standing Bear's grandson ran toward her. The Shoshone village was only a day's ride away, and young Thomas had taken to visiting regularly, fascinated by her herbs and Jackson's stories. "Morning, Thomas. Is your grandfather with you?" "He comes with others," Thomas said excitedly. "Big gathering today." Indeed, a procession was winding up the valley trail. Joseph Standing Bear led on his painted pony, followed by several families from both the Shoshone village and, surprisingly, the nearest town, Elk Ridge, some 40 miles north. Jackson emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on a leather apron. He'd been crafting furniture, having discovered a talent for woodworking that went beyond simple spoons. His face lit up at the sight of their visitors. "Joseph, welcome." He clasped the chief's hand warmly. "What brings such a gathering?" Joseph Standing Bear smiled, his weathered face creasing with humor. "The moon is right. The eagles have been seen circling your home, and my wife insists it's time." "Time for what?" Emma asked, though her heart already knew. "Time for a proper wedding," announced Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher from Elk Ridge who'd become Emma's friend. "You've been calling each other husband and wife for months now. Time to make it official." Emma and Jackson exchanged glances. They'd been living as married since fleeing McGraw, but no ceremony had blessed their union. They'd been too focused on survival, on building their new life. We don't have," Emma began. But Mrs. Patterson held up a hand. "Sarah Morrison and I have been planning this for weeks." She gestured to the wagon, where the general store owner's wife waved cheerfully. "We have everything needed for a proper celebration." "But McGraw," Jackson started. "Silas McGraw is no longer a concern," said a new voice. Sheriff Tom Briggs of Willow Creek rode up, looking older but steadier than when Emma had last seen him. "He's been arrested for fraud, assault, and attempted kidnapping. Dr. Finch testified against him to save his own skin. McGraw's in territorial prison. Won't be out for 20 years if he lives that long." Emma felt Jackson's hand find hers, squeezing gently. The shadow that had hung over them was finally lifting. "Then I guess we're having a wedding," Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. The day became a whirlwind of preparation. The Shoshone women decorated the cabin with early wildflowers and pine boughs. Mrs. Patterson had somehow procured a white dress, simple but beautiful, that fit Emma remarkably well. Sarah Morrison arranged food on makeshift tables, while the men set up torches for evening light. As the sun reached its zenith, Emma found herself standing before a mirror Sarah had brought, hardly recognizing the woman looking back. The dress made her look younger, hopeful. Her green eyes sparkled with joy instead of fear. "You're beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said softly, "and so brave. We all knew what McGraw was doing was wrong, but we were cowards. I'm sorry it took so long for us to act. You're here now," Emma said. "That's what matters." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jackson's sister Elizabeth entered, travel-worn but beaming. "Did you really think I'd miss my brother's wedding?" Emma flew into her sister-in-law's arms. They'd corresponded but hadn't dared meet until now. "He loves you so much," Elizabeth whispered. "Thank you for bringing him back to life." The ceremony took place as the sun touched the mountain peaks, painting everything gold. Joseph Standing Bear presided, blending Shoshone tradition with Christian elements in a way that honored both cultures. Jackson stood at the makeshift altar, wearing his best shirt and looking nervous as a schoolboy despite his imposing size. When Emma appeared, his face transformed with such pure love that several of the watching women dabbed their eyes. She walked to him alone. She needed no one to give her away. She was choosing this freely, completely. Jackson Rollins, Joseph Standing Bear began. You stand before the mountains and sky, before these witnesses, to take this woman as your wife. What do you offer her? Jackson's voice was steady and sure. I offer my strength to protect her, my hands to build with her, my heart to love her. I offer a life of freedom in these mountains, where no man's judgment matters more than our own. I promise to see her always as she is. Whole, perfect, enough. Emma Loudon, the chief continued. You stand freely here, choosing this man. What do you offer him? Emma's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. I offer my courage to stand beside him, my skills to build our life, my heart to love him. I offer partnership in all things, loyalty through all storms. I promise to help him forgive his past and build our future. Then, by the authority granted me by the Shoshone Nation and recognized by the territory of Wyoming, I declare you husband and wife. May the mountains witness this union and protect it always. Jackson kissed her then, lifting her off her feet as their friends cheered. When he set her down, Emma saw tears on his weathered cheeks. The celebration lasted well into the night. Tables groaned under elk stew, cornbread, wild berry pies. Jackson played his violin while couples danced on the packed earth before the cabin. Even Sheriff Briggs was seen to smile as he whirled Mrs. Patterson in a country reel. As midnight approached, the guests began departing with warm wishes and promises to visit. Joseph Standing Bear was last to leave, pressing a wrapped gift into Emma's hands. A wedding present, he said, from my wife. Inside was a beautifully woven blanket, the pattern telling a story of two paths becoming one. Emma clutched it to her chest, too moved for words. Finally, she and Jackson were alone, standing before their cabin under a canopy of stars. The same stars that had witnessed their first night here, frightened and uncertain. Now they stood as husband and wife, tested by fire and stronger for it. No regrets, Jackson asked softly. Emma laughed. Only that it took so long to find you. They went inside, to the home they'd built with their own hands. On the mantel sat her wooden spoon, polished and cherished. Above it hung Jackson's mother's Bible, salvaged from his belongings. Simple things, but symbols of the life they were creating. I have something for you, Jackson said, producing a small leather pouch. Inside was a ring, not gold or silver, but carved from elk antler and polished to a warm glow. Made it myself. It's not fancy. It's perfect. Emma slipped it on, admiring how the lamplight caught the natural patterns in the antler. Like us, natural, honest, real. They stood together at the window, looking out at their valley. Come morning, there would be chores, animals to tend, gardens to plant, life to live. Emma had plans for a school, bringing mountain children to learn their letters. Jackson talked of raising horses, breeding his stallion Zeus with the wild mountain stock. But tonight, they simply held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a cage in a dusty town square to a cabin in the mountains. From degradation to dignity. From isolation to love. What are you thinking? Jackson asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. That broken things sometimes mend stronger than they were before. Emma replied, that freedom is sweeter when you fought for it. That love is most precious when the world says you don't deserve it. Philosophy from my schoolteacher wife, Jackson teased gently. Wisdom from experience. Emma corrected. We've both been broken. Jackson, but look what we've built from the pieces. Outside, a mountain cat called. A real one this time. Not a signal. The sound that had once frightened Emma now seemed like a benediction. The mountains themselves blessing what human judgment had tried to curse. They retired to their marriage bed. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be hard winters, long days, moments of doubt. But there would also be spring wildflowers and autumn harvests. Children from the mountain families learning to read in Emma's kitchen classroom. Foals born from Jackson's careful breeding program. There would be visits from Elizabeth and the Shoshone. Friendships with the people of Elk Ridge. A life rich in ways that had nothing to do with conventional success. Most of all, there would be this: two people who'd chosen each other freely, who'd fought for their right to that choice, who'd built something beautiful in defiance of those who would cage and categorize and diminish. As Emma drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she thought of all the women still trapped in various cages, of propriety, of prejudice, of others' expectations. She hoped her story might reach some of them, might whisper that freedom was possible, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that a woman's worth was not determined by her body's capabilities, but by the strength of her spirit. The mountains stood eternal guard around their valley, and in their shadow, Emma and Jackson Rollins began their true life together, not as a barren woman and a reformed outlaw, but as partners, equals, and living proof that love recognizes no boundaries save those we accept for ourselves. Their story was written now in the very stones of the mountains, that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply choosing to be happy, and the most powerful revolution is two people deciding that together they are enough. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the untamed wilderness of the heart. We hope Emma and Jackson's story has touched you as much as it touched us. Where are you listening to this tale of courage and love? Drop a comment below and let us know. We'd love to connect with fellow lovers of Wild West romance across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of passion and adventure on the frontier, and share your thoughts on Emma and Jackson's journey. Until next time, keep riding toward your own sunset of freedom.